Europeans and other top marathon runners from around the world. Stefan Franke is in there for Germany. Mike O'Reilly, Great Britain, who placed highly here just a couple of years ago. He was 4th back in 1993 in 2:10. O'Reilly's up there at the moment in about 5th place as they churn out these 3 or 4 laps on the track. And the pace looks pretty healthy, actually. They're not hanging about. 3 minutes per kilometre is near enough a 2:10 pace. And it looks to me from, although we didn't get an indication, that they went through the kilometre there in just under 3 minutes. You can see the field very stretched out already. Diego Garcia of Spain, amongst the favourites here, already selected for their Olympic Games team. Indeed, a little bit of needle here between 2 Spaniards running. Garcia, who is one of the now very well established and successful Spanish trio that appear at major championships. That's Akanai, last year's winner. Garcia and Serrano, his compatriot, but no love lost, we understand, between Serrano and Garcia. Garcia has come to this race with a specific aim of running under 2:10, or at least setting a personal best. And Serrano has come here to beat Garcia, as we understand it. Garcia, one of 3 Spaniards selected for the Olympic Games, along with his teammates and fellow medalist from the European Championships last year, Martin Fiz, the reigning world champion as well, and Justado. Well, there's no hanging about in the opening minutes of this race, because they are churning along at a very, very solid pace indeed now. And I think this time they will head out of the stadium onto the streets for the 25 odd miles now they've got ahead of them. .35 there in front, Tsunada. 101 Horio also up there with him. Oh, what a great start. Out of the stadium onto the road, and they almost take a wrong turning, the leading trio, but no disaster, fortunately. Like a big field, although it's not. That's almost the entirety of the number of competitors there in view. Cracking along now at a very, very useful pace. There, just had a quick look at Garcia. He's got a white headband on. He's in predominantly red outfit. Tall figure you may have noticed in there is John Dienemeyer of Holland, dwarfing all the Japanese around him. But there are some 15 or 20 foreigners in this race, of whom about 10 are very well-known names on the international scene. There's 1 or 2 lesser-known Kenyans running, for example, a couple of Ethiopians too. Hopefully we'll be able to identify them for you. But you can see there, raining. There's at the moment as the athletes approach the 2-kilometre point. Very similar sort of temperature to last year. At this time of year in Japan, the temperature is usually around 8-10 degrees, there or thereabouts. But we understand that, if anything, the weather is due to get worse throughout the day. So it may yet get colder and wetter, who knows. Interesting talking to the manager as we get a quick look there at the bay, the Hakata Bay that Fukuoka sits on. Talking to the manager of Garcia, who also looks after the other 2 in the Spanish Olympic trio, Fiz and Justado. He was saying how well supported they are by the Spanish government indirectly through the Sports Federation. They were given $50,000 each to prepare for the Olympic Games, $50,000 cash, that is. And that really isn't necessarily to cover all their expenses. It's a pretty amazing situation. If they need more money to go away training or for medical costs, that is thrown in on top. $50,000 was almost a thank you for doing so well over the last couple of years. keep it going. And what's more, should any Spaniards get a gold medal in the Olympic Games, there's a $100,000 bonus from the government for that achievement. Well, it looks pretty dense in that pack, doesn't it? I think you're probably better off being on one side of it or up at the front. There's Ndetti, number 2. He's won Boston for the last couple of years, although he's never run a fast time away from Boston. 3-time winner of Boston, in fact. Juma Ikunga, you may be able to see there, in pink, wearing number 3. But, this field just sorting itself out, trying to settle down into a rhythm after what was a pretty fast start in the stadium. Ndetti has a best of 2:7:15, set that at Boston last year in 1994. Failed to finish Chicago later on in the year last year. But then this year came up trumps again in Boston to take his hat-trick, 2:9:22. Well, they're approaching 3 kilometers now. And it's anybody's race. Only a couple of miles of running behind them. Some 24 ahead. The pace is fast, which is promising, although in most Japanese marathons, their policy is not to have pacemakers. So they've got to make the pace themselves. At the moment, that's being laid out by Tsunada. We're going to a quick break. Stay with us.
Czech army captain developed a training method that would change running forever. Stamina was everything. But he wasn't just a committed athlete. When his country was invaded, he made a personal stand.
To je olympijský vítěz.
This dedication to ideals, combined with his training method, won him 3 Olympic gold medals in 1 week. A record which even today remains unbroken.
My name is Emil Zatopek.
Welcome back. We rejoin the race as the lead pack just passes through 19 kilometers. Still a very, very big pack at the front of this 49th Fukuoka Marathon. A lot of the favourites still up there. Last year's winner, wearing number 1 there, Akunai of Tanzania, is close to the front, although doing most of the pushing at the moment is Garcia, the Spaniard, with the headband. There's Taniguchi, former world champion, returning to some pretty decent form now, of course, still held in very high esteem in Japanese athletic circles for that world title on home soil in Tokyo in 1991. Serrano running beside him too. And it's quite tightly packed, that lead group. One of the little Ethiopians also there, right in the middle of that front rank of athletes. That's 38 Bekele. His teammate Gebre is also right up there. But Garcia is the man who's been at the front consistently from very early on in the race. Took the lead before the 5 kilometer point. Has just been churning out a fairly steady pace since then. Opening 5k was 15:25. Then we had a 15:27 to take them up to 10k. Speeded up slightly up to 15k. 15:15 was the third split of 5 kilometers. And now, as you can see, 20 kilometers, not very far away, and indeed the halfway split. 96, that's Kushibe, who's dropped back from the lead group. He's going to have a tough old race from pretty early on. No great fun running on your own through the second half of an international marathon. 41 there was Kabiga, I think Gladstone Kabiga of Kenya too. Also learning all about marathon running the hard way. He's dropped back as well. Big support on the streets of Fukuoka though. Akunai looking quite relaxed, just sitting in, biding his time. It's all about conservation of effort, learning how to string it out like a long piece of thread and judging it perfectly towards the end of the race. I'm a little surprised, actually, that somebody with the experience of Garcia, the Spaniard, has chosen to lead it almost non-stop. But as I said earlier, there is no pacemaker in this race. The Japanese don't believe in that as a general policy. And it's up to the athletes themselves to make the running. Big, big pack, that. Taniguchi I can see in there. Indetti is also up there. I can see Dos Santos over to the right in yellow. Back down the field. Well, perhaps the up-and-coming Japanese marathon runners. Very, very popular event, and of course that means that more youngsters, more men and women get into it at an early age. And if the bottom of your pyramid is very wide, and of course the peak is going to be that much higher. There's what, some 30 athletes in that group. Garcia, obviously very, very confident indeed. His race plan well mapped out. I'm sure he's not necessarily wanting to stay at the front so much as stick to certain splits. Just gone through 20 kilometers there. And the split 15:19, it's almost identical to the previous one for that last 5 kilometer segment. 61:26 the time at 20 kilometers. They're on just under 2:10 pace. But it's obviously pretty good running conditions. You can tell that from the size of the pack. Although the temperature is beginning to drop slightly. Remember, it was 12 degrees at the start. It's now down to around 9 degrees, we understand. Although the rain holding off at the moment that fell so heavily earlier on in the morning. Incidentally, one major withdrawal from this race was Yobes Ondieki. The Kenyan former World 5000 champion was hoping to come to Japan, where of course he won that 5000 world title back in '91, won it in Tokyo, and run well in this marathon. But 5 days ago, Ondieki pulled out saying he felt he wasn't in good enough shape. And it's been announced that the Kenyan Federation have chosen Boston as the trial for the Kenyans for the Olympic Games. So most of the big-name Kenyans, and I'm sure Ndeti will be amongst them, looking for a 4th consecutive win, will be running Boston on April the 15th in an attempt to make their trio for Atlanta. Humidity remains surprisingly high at around 80%, and that's why you can see so many of those men grabbing a drink at that feed station. Taniguchi there to the right of picture has that awkward-looking style, very, very stiff in the upper body, and his head always leans over to the right. And I think it gets further and further over. The angle gets more and more extreme as he gets more and more tired. 157 there in white. The yellow number, that's Osaki. Look at the top right-hand corner of your screen. They're almost at halfway now, with Garcia there, sipping away at his drink, leading proceedings. And you can bet that an awful lot of those men will have their halfway split time drawn across their arm, forearm, left arm or right arm. And that'll give them a good idea of what sort of time they're heading for there. Garcia clicks his watch as he approaches halfway. Maybe it actually went off and he was hoping to run 64:30 at halfway. He's going to be slightly outside that. There's the halfway point. And it's around 64:50 at halfway for Garcia. At the front of this field, Serrano, back in about 10th place at the moment, about the tallest man in that group. You may be able to see in the white vest. Looking quite comfortable at the moment. His only other marathon this year, Serrano, was a non-finishing performance in Rotterdam back in April. That was a big disappointment after last year setting what was then a Spanish record in his debut in Berlin. Saw that Spanish record blitzed out of the way by Fizz's win, ironically, in Rotterdam. Martin Fizz, who is quite rightfully now acknowledged as the world's premier marathon runner after his wins in the European Championships, Rotterdam earlier on this year, and then of course in Sweden at the World Championships in that incredible battle through the closing stages with Serrano of Mexico. He came out and took the world title. The time immaterial. It was very warm in Gothenburg. Very, very different conditions to this. And it has to be said that but for the fact that there is quite a lot of water on the road surface, these conditions are almost ideal, maybe a little bit too humid. But some athletes will be suffering from the water splashing up onto the back of their legs. And it can lead to cramp in the latter stages when fatigue starts setting in. That lead pack still very big. One or two people beginning to drop off the back of it. The last thing people will want is to drop off the back of it, because then you start heading backwards very quickly as you have to make more running effort yourself. If you can be tucked into a group like that, then you do get dragged along by the momentum of the group. And now things beginning to happen. Garcia, perhaps impatient with the size of the group and how long it's taking it to break up, pushing on, and he's got a couple of runners with him. 22 there. And 1:57. 22 is Kawashima. 1:57 Osaki. They've chosen to go with him. And there's a definite attempt to get away here from Garcia. Remember, those 5 kilometer splits have been getting gradually faster. They started with 15:25, then a 15:27, an acceleration to 15 kilometers of 15:15, and then a 15:19. And at 22 kilometers, it'll be very interesting to see what this 5K segment comes out at, because Garcia is churning along now, and everybody else back in that pack is just wondering whether or not to go with it. Should they let the gap grow? Should they sit back and wait for them to come back, or will they come back? Very brave, determined, tunnel vision type running here from Garcia. Trained so much of the year with Martin Fizz and Justado up in the mountains of Segovia at an altitude of around 2,000 meters. The trio trained together, are great friends, looked after by the same manager as I said earlier. Garcia himself comes from Mastacia, near San Sebastian, up in the north of Spain, where there's a great distance running tradition. A lot of big cross-country races going up there indeed. It's hosted, that region of Spain has hosted the World Cross Country on several occasions, most recently a couple of years ago at Amorebieta. So Garcia here, not holding back at all, chasing a personal best. His current best is 2:10:30. Set that back in Olympic year in 1992. .35 there, that's Tsunada. But this is impressive running. A lot of these men surely running way beyond themselves through halfway and into the second half of this race. And it's only a matter of time before they start peeling off the back of that pack. This is just what athletes on the verge of the big time need, is an opportunity to break through from the 2:13, 2:14, 2:15 territory into the 2:10, 2:11 sort of region. And they start becoming a valuable commodity on the international marathon circuit. Single file for these three. Garcia, the one man that's having to do so much more, put in a lot more effort. He's not chasing anybody, he hasn't got a vest or anybody's back to look at. Just setting his own tempo here and doing it very well indeed. As 23 kilometers comes up, but still a long way to go. Some 18 kilometers or so, 19 kilometers. But without any doubt, Garcia beginning to ask some questions. That group, that second group, you can see is being gradually reduced to single file now as the chase is on. Garcia, is he going to get away with it? Long, long way to go. We're going to a quick break, but do stay with us. We rejoin the race then as the athletes approach 34 kilometres. And the field really has broken up now for far too long. Way past halfway, there was a big lead group of some 30 or 35 athletes. We're now down to a group of 8, and Dos Santos of Brazil has taken the lead and doing some of the pushing at the moment. Garcia is still there, who has led the entire race up to this stage. You can see they're just going through the 34-kilometre point. But it's nicely balanced from the domestic point of view too. There's plenty of Japanese in that group. Taniguchi is in there as well. Dos Santos leads then from Garcia. Taniguchi and Serrano are in there. Hanada also in there. Oya, Zayatsu and Hiratsuka. It's the chasing group. One of the Ethiopians there you can see. That's number 37 we just saw, who's trying to hang on now. That's Gebre. But this, the leading octet, if you like. And once again, Garcia back in the driving seat. There was a Dos Santos in the frame last year, but it wasn't Luis Antonio in the yellow there. It was Valdenor Dos Santos. Took 3rd place in 1994. And yet again, we have a Brazilian up there and looking very strong. He's quite muscular, isn't he? Wearing number 8 there. Probably better muscle than anybody else in this group. Obviously does quite a lot of upper body conditioning work. Not necessarily essential for good distance running, but a lot of coaches and athletes feel it helps. And it does depend from one individual to another just how important that side of development is. There's Taniguchi. "35 years old now, Taniguchi, still running well. Indeed, there's 1 or 2 veterans in this group, or relatively speaking veterans. Garcia is 34. Knows this course. He was 3rd here back in 1992. Same year in which he came 9th at the Olympic Games in Barcelona. And indeed, apart from a blip at Boston last year when he was 27th, he has an admirable record of consistency with that silver medal in Helsinki last year at the Europeans, and then he won Seville on home soil earlier on this year in 2:11, but still looking for that key to the fast time territory, if you like. He's never broken 2:10, and that's one of his principal objectives today. 81 there, Hanada. Beside him, 34, that's Oya. I have to say that everybody in this group looking pretty comfortable at the moment. This really is a rarity to see an athlete of the caliber of Garcia leading from the front in this way, doing all the work virtually up to this stage. Only momentarily did we have Dos Santos in front just now, but Garcia has taken up the reins once more. Serrano is a compatriot in the white vest there towards the back of the group. Tallest man in this group. Has never got to the front. All the time he's just tucked in there and let the others do the racing. And really, that is the smart way to run. Let the others do the work. The physical and psychological strain and burden is theirs. And you may be able to see now the rain absolutely pouring down. It's got colder too. Temperature just 8 degrees now, and the rain is absolutely coming down like curtain rods. What's some 7 kilometers to go? That's around 4.5 miles. So still a lot of racing to come as we see 63 there, Hiratsuka. A bit of a grimace on his face, but I'm impressed with the form of these men. None of them yet really showing the strain. Garcia there, having a little grimace to himself, maybe trying to step it up another notch and make this pace tell. He is an out-and-out marathon runner, Garcia. never come anywhere near international class at 10,000 meters. 28.48, his best 10,000. That was back in Olympic year, 92. .22 there, still running pretty well. Kawashima is chasing that lead group and holding very, very good form considering he's on his own. Indeed, just behind Kawashima there, we had a quick look at Osaki, who was one of the two Japanese who tried to go with Garcia just after halfway when he made a slight break, opened up a gap, and Osaki now paying for it. .54, Zayasu looking very, very controlled there. You have to admire Garcia because at this stage, really, he could slow down, settle into the back of the group and let somebody else do the work, but he's determined to get a time here. I really do get the feeling that he'd prefer to finish 8th out of these this group, last and 8th out of this group in 2:9.59 than he would finish in the top 3 in 2:11.5, 2:12. Very, very much focused on the major championships now, Garcia and his teammates Fears and Shusdado, and he will regard this race as a stepping stone to Atlanta. Far more important as far as he's concerned to come out of this race with the psychological comfort and physical experience of having run a fast time than to place highly in a racing situation, but in a slow time. He's done that plenty of times. He doesn't need slow times. He needs a fast time now to give him that extra edge to his confidence. As we see so many of these men grab their drinks at that table. 22, Kawashima goes through. Quite rare, really, to have temperatures as low as 8 degrees, 9 degrees, and yet for the humidity to stay relatively high. But that is what's happening, as we understand it. Temperature at 20 kilometers was 9.5 degrees, the humidity 90%. Serrano there, wearing number 4. Much, much better 10,000 meter runner. And that's 21 in a lot of trouble there. That was Hayata, looking like he's suffering in the latter stages. No room for weakness now in this group because they are still churning out very solid splits. Let's have a look. Up to 25 kilometers, they produced the fastest 5-kilometer split yet, 15:07. That's when we saw Garcia earlier on making that break. Then up to 30k of 15:24. So it has slowed a little bit. That's why they've closed up on him. But now again, one gets the impression there's an attack on and the group is breaking up. It's still Garcia doing the damage. 34 there hanging in is Oya. This is very impressive running from Oya. This young man, well, he's 29, but has never come anywhere near this sort of these sort of splits before. His best is 2:12, indeed, only just under 2:13. Did that in Paris earlier on this year. Oya, just to the right of your picture there, behind the shoulder of Garcia. And now it's beginning to be reduced to single file. Still looking very cool there is Dos Santos in the yellow. Eyes fixed on the road surface ahead. And Taniguchi at the back of the group. And a little bit of daylight, I think, beginning to appear. There he is. Has a best Taniguchi of 2:7:40. But that was some 7 years ago now. former winner of London, Taniguchi, won it back in 1987. He's also recorded big wins at Tokyo and Sapporo. Great misfortune for Taniguchi there at the Olympic Games in 1992. He lost a shoe very soon after halfway and lost 150 meters. That's around 30 seconds to the leaders while getting the shoe back on and getting back into the race. And really, as he was the reigning world champion from the previous year, that was his big hopes down and out. 157, there's Osaki. He was the one, remember, involved in the breakaway with Garcia, and he's beginning to pay for it now. The rain, if anything, getting heavier. Although Osaki does appear to be rallying, he's now ahead of Kawashima there. And the incentive for these men, of course, is to keep churning out the pace and try and at least get a good time, even if they don't finish in the top 10. Japanese, we understand, are using 3 races as their selection races for the Olympic Games. Fukuoka, one of those 3, so performances here absolutely vital. Beppu and Tokyo are the others. And that's 21 in trouble there. Well, we saw him 5 minutes or so ago. Hayata really suffering, and look at that, the determination to carry on. Remember, the Japanese character, ideally suited to marathon running. Never say die, never give up. Very, very tough, and this is why they do have such great strength in depth and why they do love the event. They really admire the qualities necessary for marathon running, and Taniguchi now, one of their great past champions, looks like he's the first one of these 8 that have been together for a few kilometers to be peeling off the back. Garcia resisting the temptation here to put in a surge. He must be aware of the fact that the pace that he's laying down at the moment isn't damaging several of the men behind him. They're all tucking in, looking quite comfortable. And he may feel that one way to break it up, to loosen their grip, if you like, behind him, would be to put in a surge and upset their rhythm. But I think there is the danger in that, of course, of doing the same to himself, and he would prefer to just keep it nice and steady and finish, if necessary, with several of these men ahead of him, but with a solid time. That gap to Taniguchi growing now, back in 8th place. Well, Serrano there in the white, number 4. We understand, very angry that a window wasn't left for him to make the Spanish trio for Atlanta. They've been selected already. Garcia, one of them, there in the lead with Diosdado and Fizz. And maybe trying to make a point here to the selectors and coaches back in Spain if he can finish ahead of Garcia, although it would be all to no avail. The team is selected. Garcia knows that. Well, one has peeled off, but a long way to go yet for these men. Stay with us.
You either ran today or you didn't.
Boris Becker and Yannick Noah have 2 things in common. They both love tennis and children. Noah versus Becker, a charity exhibition match in favour of children with cancer. Live on Monday, 8 p.m. on Eurosport.
Welcome back. You've missed nothing while you've been away. The race hotting up now and the real racing ahead. I said there's a long way to go. Well, in real terms, there isn't. but in what it really represents, these last few kilometres there is, because there's still 7 men in it, with Taniguchi now peeling off the back of this group, and Dos Santos hits the front. He did this 2 or 3 kilometres back, but one senses there's an acceleration now as Garcia slips into 3rd place. Still, what, 4 Japanese in this lead group of 7. Very, very impressive packing by the Japanese. How the crowds are loving it. Look at that, the rain not keeping people off the streets. Quite astonishing, the number of people out watching this race as Dos Santos begins to get his head down, still with those gloves on, and pushes on very quickly now. Look, reduced to single file. Serrano tucking in there behind him. Oya is the little Japanese in 3rd place, who's running out of his skin here today. Remember, his best before this race, 2:12.53. He's on schedule here to run something around 2:10, maybe a little faster. This is his 11th marathon, Oya. He's never broken 2:12. Indeed, only just nipped under 2:13. But at last today, things are clicking for the 29-year-old. And that's a marvellous reward for his perseverance. There he is, 34, tucked in behind Santos and Serrano. And this a reassuring run from Serrano, who, although he ran very well in his debut last year in Berlin, failed to finish in Rotterdam earlier on this year. Although, of course, now, no matter what he does in this race, he has the prospect of either going for the Spanish team at 10,000 in the Olympic Games or not running in Atlanta at all. And that's pretty sad for my money. This is a very competent performance from Serrano. He's a 27.47 man at 10,000, although maybe these days, at the age of 30, has lost a little bit of his edge as he's concentrating on marathon and the distance training necessary for that. Without any doubt, we've had a pretty substantial acceleration now from Dos Santos. 3 of the Japanese peeling off the back of this group are Hanada, Zayasu and Hiratsuka. And I think there as Garcia felt the pace slackening, so he took up the mantle again and hit the front. He would love to finish ahead of Serrano, although his principal objectives remain getting a personal best. That means breaking 2:10.30 and ideally getting under 2:10. That would be the icing on the cake from his point of view. Serrano, well, he's already done that. 2:09.13 he ran in Berlin last year when he was 3rd. Spanish record at the time. Still learning the ropes, really, because Garcia has many, many marathons behind him. Actually appeared in London once or twice. Never with any great results. 17th in 1990. 23rd the following year when London hosted the World Cup. But really, the man having the run of his life here is Masaki Oya there to the left, 34. 10 Japanese have broken 2:10 before. And if Oya can keep this going, he's heading to join that group. He'll be the 11th. As we see Hayata there in problems yet again. You can see the rain really chucking it down now. I think these men almost oblivious to that, such as the intensity of effort and concentration at this stage. Garcia hanging on to these 3, back in 4th place there. Has led what? Probably 90% of this race. Desperately needs to keep in touch with these 3 now. Deserves a fast time out of this race, if nothing else. Flip back to Taniguchi here. That's the Taniguchi we know and love. That grimace that was etched into our memories for the last few kilometres of that World Championships in '91. That head leaning over to one side. He's back in 8th place still, Taniguchi there, chasing this trio in front of him. And of course this race vital to all these Japanese athletes, as is such an important pointer towards Olympic selection. Garcia running without that luxury. Perhaps the only man here doing that. He knows he's in the Atlanta team. Incidentally, we understand the Atlanta course is very, very undulating. And we all know already that it's going to be hot and humid in Atlanta next summer for those Olympic Games. Will suit the Spaniards, of course. They didn't mind the heat in Helsinki. Certainly suited Fizz in Gothenburg. And no doubt they'll be putting in plenty of long runs in the Spanish heat from spring onwards to acclimatise. Well, Serrano back in front. There's a great little battle going on here between Serrano and Dos Santos, both trying to get that psychological edge, maybe even open up a gap on the men around them. Oya just sitting in there, and probably at this stage, knowing that he's on schedule for a very fast time, heading to be knocking off something like 2.5 minutes from his personal best. And that in itself is a wonderful spur. The adrenaline will be flowing. You'll be getting massive support from the crowds at the roadside now as the leading Japanese. And look at this, he's staying right in contact with Dos Santos and Serrano, trying to stay right there with them so that thread, that vital thread that I've talked about before, isn't broken. Grimacing very, very strongly now with Dos Santos in the lead. So powerfully built, Dos Santos, isn't he? Like a little boxer in the upper body. Quite contrast to the vast majority of these other elite athletes. Now Oya hits the front, and I think that's the first time he's been out in front. Well, renewed confidence from the little Japanese. Quite a different young man will be finishing this race from that started it. He started it as just another good marathon runner. He's going to finish it as one of the fastest in the world for 1995. Has been a vintage year for marathon running. Some 11 men have gone under 2:10 in 1995. Berlin, of course, leading the rankings, if you like, with that 2:07.02 of Lelai and Rousseau just behind him. And then Dionisio Cerrón winning London for the second consecutive year with 2:08.30, just ahead of Moneghetti. Pinto was third in London, himself under 2:09. And Martin Fizz setting the current Spanish record in Rotterdam with 2:08.57. And Cosmas Ndetti, who hasn't had a good time of it today, maybe not liking this cold, wet weather, is also up there amongst the fastest times of the year with his win at Boston. But this is racing now. The time's out of the way. Garcia has dropped back. He's beginning to suffer now, although he's still running pretty well. Surely heading for a personal best, and that was his principal objective. But these three maintaining the tempo, beginning to open up a gap in Garcia, but the racing is on now without any doubt. What, about 1 kilometre to go, just about within sight of that Hyundai Stadium. And Dos Santos pushing on. Serrano with easily the fastest time over 10,000 metres on the track of these three in second place. Little Oya hanging in there. Well, of course, Dos Santos earned enormous respect with that bronze medal in Gothenburg behind the battle for gold and silver between Fizz and Cerrón. He has won 4 marathons before, Dos Santos. Won Chicago last year and was third at Boston this year behind Ndetti. And perhaps just thinking better there of taking the lead quite so early. They've got just over 1 lap to run when they turn into the stadium, get onto the track. They've got about 500 metres to run on the track. But at the moment, you could throw, well, a blanket over these two. I was going to say a handkerchief. They're so close together, and the pace still picking up. Look at Serrano gritting his teeth. We had a great women's Tokyo Marathon last month with 2 or 3 athletes entering the stadium together, and we've got the same again here. The Japanese will be lapping this up. Marvellous racing, and onto the track they go. The same track in which they ran a mile some 2 hours ago. Just over 1 lap to go on this track. Now, is Serrano confident of his sprint finish? He is the man with real track pedigree. Comes past Dos Santos. Oya, determined to hang on to these two, has looked in the most pain for the last couple of kilometres of any of them. They've got 1 lap to go now. Watch the clocks. Without any doubt, they're going to finish under 2:10. Great running for the conditions. Understand that Andretti and Stefan Franco, the German, have both suffered with cramp in the latter stages of this race because of the wet weather, and Serrano's made his kick. He's gone very early. Has to be confident of his speed endurance, and believe me, this is sprinting for them. Each of those men going absolutely flat out. Can Dos Santos, the Brazilian, close the gap? Serrano glances over his shoulder. Dos Santos closing now. Oya looks to be beaten back in 3rd place, but what a tremendous run he's had wherever he finishes amongst these 3. Another look over his shoulder. Just like a track race this, Dos Santos moves wide, and look at that power. Well, we said earlier on, this boy looked very, very strongly built up top, and he's using all that muscle mass now as he comes home to what is a very, very competent, confident run. The win way under 2:10. 2:09.29 there for Dos Santos. Serrano, a marvellous run in 2nd place, and Oya jubilant with that 3rd place. And a huge new personal best for the little Japanese. He's knocked over 3 minutes off his personal best. Garcia coming home to 4th place, and yes, he's broken 2:10. A new personal best for him, and he's achieved everything he could have hoped for in this race. It matters not a jot that he finishes behind Serrano, his teammate, or his compatriot, I should say. There's Taniguchi. Well, he's had a brave old run too, Taniguchi. 54 coming home now. That's Zayatsu. He too heading for a very, very good time, and this is so important. Yes, absolutely delighted with that one. In 5th place, Zayatsu. 2nd Japanese here, and with Olympic places on the line. This battle for 6th and 7th. Crucial. Does look like 81 Katsuhiko Hanada here is going to come home in 6th place. 2:10.39 his time. Taniguchi right behind him in 7th place. And another Japanese there in 8th place, Hiratsuka. That's 5 Japanese in the top 8, all of them way under 2:11. Dos Santos looks so strong in the last 100 meters there. All the emotion coming out now. He's one very tired and very, very pleased athlete. A glorious mixture of pain and elation there. In fact, I do think he's crying. He's won plenty of marathons before, but Dos Santos there winning in 2:09.30. Well, the conditions through the second half have really tested these men.